Greetings, book lovers everywhere. I'm E-Train and welcome to E-Train Talks. Today, I'm joined by award-winning author Terry C. Jennings. Terry writes children's fiction, nonfiction, and fact-based fiction. She also writes for various educational outlets, including the Smithsonian Science and Technology, and is represented by Natalie Lacosel of Irene Goodman Literary. As you can tell, Terry C. Jennings is so accomplished, and it contributes greatly to the writing community. Aside from being an author, Terry is an avid reader, traveler, and lifelong learner. I'm so excited to talk with her today because we're talking about Terry's recent novel, which came out in January, published by Little Bee Books, Pauli Murray, The Life of a Pioneering Feminist and Civil Rights Activist. It's such a powerful biography in verse, and I loved it. Thank you so much for joining me today, Terry. It's such an honor to have you on my podcast.
Oh, it's my honor to be here. I am really touched that you're having me and by what you're doing. I am delighted, and thank you for the kind words about the Pauli Murray book. This was a work of love. I know everybody says that about their books, but it's been in the works probably since 2012. Wow. So it's been with me. I've been with Pauli for a long time, and thank you for all the kind words. I sure appreciate you. And you're having me on your podcast.
Well, I appreciate you being here. I'm just so thrilled to learn more about your writing and the story behind Pauli Murray, the life of a pioneering feminist and civil rights activist. So, my first question is, from your novel, I learned that Pauli Murray was a very talented poet and had a beautiful way with words. Is that why you chose to write Pauli's story in verse?
Oh, you know what? That was probably a reason why not to write it, because she was so accomplished and such a beautiful, beautiful writer. And it was scary to do it in verse. And, sometimes you think, oh gosh, this is just going to happen this way. This is the way it has to be. Something comes from above and tells you to do it in verse. That was not the way it was for this. I worked really, really hard on this. I tried writing a picture book biography, not in verse, not rhyming. I tried doing several of them and they didn't work. I tried doing a prose biography, a couple of them, and nothing seemed to work. But there were all these phrases, all these little things, all these things about Pauli Murray, about her heart, that kept rolling around in my head. And so when I started saying, okay, let me see if I can do this in verse, let me see how this could work. And when that happened, when I started writing it in verse, then it started working, because I think that she was such a human being that felt so much. She felt so deeply that the only way to get to her heart was through verse. But it was really daunting because she was, like you said, a wonderful poet, and there was no way that I could be her equal. And I didn't try. We didn't try, but it really worked. Now, one other thing that made me want to do it in verse is because there's so much about Pauli Murray, and it would be a long work. We had to cover a lot because she was so impactful in so many ways. And I wanted to reach young readers. And I think verse, by shortening it, by giving you short bursts of information, makes it a lot more accessible to young readers. And it took Rosita and I a good amount of time to convince our agent that verse was the way to go. But thank goodness we did find an editor, Courtney Fahey at Little Bee, who loved the idea of verse, and she went with us.
Well, I'm so glad that you trusted the process and didn't give up. You worked with Rosita for so long. There are so many different aspects of Pauli Murray that you want, and you tried prose, you tried picture books, but nothing worked, and you found verse. And I think that's just so important to avid readers, like people who aspire to become authors. Just trust the process and never give up.
Exactly. You can't give up. I think Pauli Murray was a story that needed to be told. Mm-hmm. Ever since I've met her, met in quotes in 2012, I knew that hers was a story that needed to be told. So yeah, you can't give up. You can't.
And I'm so glad that you didn't give up, because Pauli Murray, the life of a pioneering feminist and civil rights activist, I think Pauli's story just fits perfectly in verse. You found the right story style, and it really works out, because I know so many people just love novels in verse. Books like Starfish, The Road to After,
Right.
they're all so meaningful. And verse, Pauli lived such a meaningful life, and she was so powerful. So I think her life really fits into the verse style.
It did. It did. I agree with you.
So your novel shared so much important information about Pauli Murray's life, information that I'm so grateful that you shared. What resources did you use to research Pauli Murray's story?
Well, she was a prolific writer. So, I think I read everything that she wrote. She wrote an autobiography. She wrote a book called Proud Shoes, which was the story of her family, but it was not only the story of her family, but she meant it to be the story of Black Americans everywhere from the time that they came from Africa, because when she was in school, nobody had taught her the history of Black Americans in the United States. And that was a lack that she felt, and she started wanting to do it for her kids, for her grandkids, nieces, like Rosita. But she ended up doing it for everybody. It ended up being an epic of Black Americans. And I don't know, I'm going to mention Alex Haley, who wrote the book Roots, and there was a program about it, a TV series, one of the first TV series, and it was very powerful. But by golly, he took her lead. She was there first, and she did it first. So I read her autobiography. I read Proud Shoes. I read her poetry. She was a prolific newspaper article writer. Every time she saw something wrong, she would write about it. She would say, hey, we got to do something about this. I read all those articles. I read her legal opinions. I also read collections of her letters. She wrote a lot to Eleanor Roosevelt, and there's a book called The Firebrand and the First Lady. And imagine this young Black kid becoming friends with Eleanor Roosevelt, the First Lady of the United States. And she would say, wait a minute, President Roosevelt can't do this because this is what it's doing to African Americans. This is what it's doing to Black people. She would not, by the way, she would not have said Black. She preferred the term Negro, but I'm going to use Black because I believe that that's where we are. But she actually preferred the word Negro with a capital N. But yeah, we had, she was friends with Eleanor Roosevelt. She went to Eleanor Roosevelt's home. They had tea. Eleanor invited her to come to her house, and Pauli would get a read if there was somebody that Eleanor wanted to know. She would ask Pauli, ask her for dinner and say, so what did you think about that person? And Pauli would say, well, they didn't seem to be very genuine to me, and they would discuss somebody. So it was that kind of relation, that kind of impact that she had in history. She also had letters with Caroline Ware, who was her teacher at Howard University. And then I read other biographies of her, many, many books about her. I looked at myself getting ready for this, and I had 25 books in print. That doesn't count all the stuff that I looked online. But you know what the most important, the best, the funnest, one of those things that gives you goosebumps? It was when I went to Boston, to the Radcliffe Library, to the Schlesinger Library at Radcliffe, and got her papers. And I touched the letters that she touched. And I saw the notes that she wrote. And oh my goodness, that was the most amazing thing. I couldn't, it was one of those moments that is a highlight of your career, maybe even a highlight of your life. I found through her notes that were not in any of her books about the struggles that she had with gender identification, and the notes that she wrote about trying to find treatments. I think if the technology had been available then, Pauli might have tried to transition. I honestly believe that. I don't have anything that says that, but she did try to find things. She did try to find out why it was that she felt like a man trapped in a woman's body. That's her quote. That's her quote. Yeah, I think that the most important part of my research was the actual touching the actual things that she wrote. But yeah, but I did so much research. I mean, years and years of it.
Wow. Just like what I said in response to your last answer, it's just never giving up. And I just don't know if, like, I can understand that feeling. You're touching like one of your hero's letters, and that's just seems like such a surreal moment. Like you're touching what Pauli Murray wrote. I think that just sounds so surreal and just kind of inspiring that if you keep learning, if you keep working hard, you're going to achieve your goals. And now you're kind of touching a piece of history. So that's just wow. It must have been such a surreal experience.
Absolutely. Touching a piece of history and touching a piece of her. That's exactly what it was.
So on to my next question. And I know currently you're giving me such great answers. Like I don't know how I can just respond to them, because your answers are just so intelligent, and like it feels like you've already prepared a lot for this interview, and your words are so inspiring. Just
of course, how could I not prepare? You are going to all this trouble and having me. Of course I'm going to prepare. Thank you.
Thank you for coming, and your answers, they're just very meaningful. And speaking of, why did you decide to write about Pauli Murray, and in what ways does Pauli's story inspire you?
Okay, so I met, again, the quotes, I met Pauli when I was writing a book about feminism. It's called The Women's Liberation Movement from 1960 to 1990. Mm-hmm. And women owe the rights that we have in the workplace today to Pauli Murray. In 1964, Congress was poised to pass the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which would give equal pay for equal work for Black men. And Pauli Murray said, well, probably she said something even, like some kind of, well, she may not have said a curse word, but anyway, I would have said like, right, yeah, you can't just talk about Black men. And what she said, she started writing, of course, and what she said was, look, guys, because most of those congressmen were guys, if you give Black men equality, you're only affecting 5 to 8% of the population. I think it was 5. I'm going to be generous and say even, as much as 8%. But she said, if you give women and Black men the right to have equal pay for equal work, you're affecting more than 50%, like 55% of the population. And remember that Black women are the ones that need the equality because they're the ones who are the mothers. They're the ones who are heads of families. And she wrote so eloquently, and she wrote, and she had so many proofs. And she said that what she called Jane Crow, which was the other side of the coin of Jim Crow, but against women, she said that Jane Crow was just another kind of racial discrimination. Gender discrimination was had the same effect as racial discrimination. So when I met her, and she was so important, I began to read more about her because, and I know that you want to be a writer, and when you are a writer and you're a nonfiction writer, you get an idea about somebody and you go, oh, maybe I need to find out more about them. Maybe there's a book in there somewhere. And Pauli Murray was just crying to be written about. And so I said, I'm going to start reading. So as I was doing other work, I started reading more about her. And I wanted to write about her as a feminist. And I thought there would be so much about her. And there I was. Not to say anything about the fact that, I mean, there was gobs and gobs of stuff about her as a feminist. But it turns out that she was equally as important in the civil rights movement. And that wasn't evident to me when I first started researching the women's liberation book. And what was so also amazing about her was that she was the one that came up with the idea that won Brown versus Board of Education. And Brown versus Board of Education was the case that ended school discrimination in schools, segregation in schools, that ended that. Well, she came up with the idea and she gave it to her professors at Howard University, who actually laughed at her because she said it was, that you should base the case on the 14th Amendment. Well, danged if 10 years later, they didn't use that, not only her idea, but her work, and they won the case, and nobody gave her credit. And nobody said anything about it. Nobody even told her. She didn't even find out until 10 years later that it was her work that had been the basis for that case. Lawyers, when they do something, they can give credit. Ruth Bader Ginsburg gave Pauli credit for that idea, for using the 14th Amendment in her Reed versus Reed Supreme Court victory. She said, thank you. And, she put it right there on the front page. They could have done the same thing. It wouldn't have taken anything away from them. But, it was, women were not thought of as well at the time. And it just, I don't know. I don't know. It was such a monumental piece of work and a monumental piece of thinking and strategy that she came up with that I'm just very surprised that nobody gave her credit. But anyway, when I started reading about her, I noticed that there were no books about her for young readers. So I just read and read and read. And the more that I read, the more that I like her. And she always, what inspired me to write about her is that she always spoke against injustice. She saw something that was wrong and she tried to do something about it, often at great personal cost. So she was truly a human who changed the world for the better. And that's why I wanted to write about her.
Well, it certainly sounds like she did. She changed the world for the better. And I think there needs to be more stories about Pauli Murray. Like, you found a lot of resources about her as a feminist, but there's so much more to Pauli Murray than just her feminism. She did so much to help people. Like, she was kind of a superhero at heart because she spoke out whenever she saw injustice. And I think that's just so inspiring. And I certainly would want to write about Pauli Murray if I had discovered her. I'd want to write everything about her, read every single story about Pauli Murray. Unfortunately, there aren't enough for young readers, but when I found your story, I had to read it.
Good.
So I'm just so glad that you wrote about Pauli Murray. I didn't even know anything about her until I read your novel in verse. And that's just horrible. There needs to be more about Pauli Murray. But I'm just grateful that I found your book and that there are some resources for young readers about Pauli Murray now, because her story, it deserves to be told.
It does deserve to be told. And, you're not the only one that had never heard about Pauli Murray. Most adults, Black or white, have not heard about Pauli Murray. That's the biggest thing that I get on Twitter and on, when you talk to people, very few people knew about Pauli Murray. She was a doer, but she never got credit. And she didn't ask for the credit to her, credit to her, because she was not that kind of person. She wanted to do the work, and that was fine. That was rewarding enough for her.
Yeah. Just doing good was enough for her.
Mm-hmm.
That's just, she had such a great heart, and she was in it for the right reasons. She was a civil rights activist, a feminist, all of the amazing qualities that she possessed. She wasn't in it for any of the credit. She was in it just to do good. She was a good person. She was a great person. And I'm just
What?
and I think that she'd be honored that you wrote about her, because Pauli, her story, you wrote it beautifully. And I saw in the back of your book that there were so many resources that you used to discover more about Pauli Murray. You had you were seriously dedicated. And that's just so great. You need to be dedicated as a writer, and you were certainly dedicated.
Yep, you can tell a lot about a book by the bibliography, right?
Yeah.
You can tell a lot about the writer by the bibliography.
Yes, you definitely can. And there were like over 2 pages of links and websites and books. You were all in. You were basically the definition of who I want to be as a writer. I want to look at every single website, Wikipedia, just so many, and every single book, read every book in the library about the literary character that I want to write about. You're the definition of the kind of author I want to be.
Well, thank you. That makes me feel very proud. Thank you.
And I just find it so fascinating and interesting that Pauli Murray's niece, Rosita Stevens Hulsey, co-authored Pauli Murray, the life of a pioneering feminist and civil rights activist. Would you share when and how you first met Rosita, and tell us a little bit about your experience writing and talking with her about Pauli Murray?
Okay, now that's a very interesting story, because I told you I started working on this book in 2012, and there were many iterations, there were many failures. I knew that I could write well as about Pauli as a feminist and as a poet and even as a lawyer. I also knew that I could never capture Pauli Murray as an African American, as a member of her race. I wanted to reach out to her family in hopes that someone would collaborate with me, and also in hopes that I would fill in more about Pauli Murray as a human being, as a child, as what was he, what do you remember about her? Because even if you write, all of us write about, write our biography, there are things that we're going to leave out because they're uncomfortable for us. There are things that we're going to remember one way and shade this way and shade that way. So I wanted to talk to her family, just like I didn't just take her word for everything. I always went to other biographies to find out what other people had written, and I found her other letters. Always corroborate what you have, and I wanted to corroborate that her personal life with a member of her family. I tried to contact, there's the Pauli Murray Foundation, and I tried to contact them, but I was not successful. But one day, I did contact the Pauli Murray Center, and I talked to Barbara Lau, who was or is still the head of the center, and one day she sent me an invitation to a play put on at Howard University. I live right outside of Washington, D.C., and Howard University is in Washington, D.C., and they were putting on a play about Pauli Murray. And of course I wanted to see it, but there was a double reason there, because I thought, you know what, I wonder if somebody's going to be there who knows somebody who could put me in touch with the family. So I went real early, and I took my husband and a couple of friends, and we all went, and it was in the chapel. And so I started cruising, trying to see if I could find any members of the family. And by golly, when I got to the front of the chapel, there's this couple pews that say reserved for Pauli Murray family. Bingo. I was in luck. So I started stalking those pews until they came. And then when they came, I introduced myself and Rosita, and I said, I'm working on a book about Pauli Murray, and I'd love to talk to one or all of you and work with you on this book. And Rosita raised her hand, and she's a teacher. She just retired being a teacher. And she's been wanting to lift up Pauli Murray's name, her aunt's name, to make sure that everybody knows about it. So, it was kind of like a match made in heaven. And so we would work, the way we worked together, we did a lot of, we kind of started, so I had all my research. I had done all these things that were bad, that didn't work. And so then we started with a mission, what was our mission? What did we want to do? We came up with an outline together. Then she talked to her cousins. We spent a week together. She came over to my house and we sat on the porch and we worked together. It was Pauli Murray from morning till night. And she called her cousins, and she would be talking to her cousins and I would be listening in. And so I learned a lot from her through that. And I learned a lot about Pauli from their family. So then I would write and then send to her, and she would say, yeah, no, let's change this, let's change that. She would add things. And there's a place, and this is so small, but it's one of those things that I would have never thought about. There's a place in the book in which she says Pauli Murray is in a bus, and the seat in Virginia, my state, and she's riding in the back of the bus, and the seat in the back of the bus is broken, and so she refuses to sit there because the seat is broken. And so I go, I do write all that stuff. And Rosita says, she paid the same as everybody else. Of course she paid the same as everybody else. I would not ever have even thought of that. It's just like, because you haven't been in those shoes. So it was great. So we worked together. It was very collaborative. Lots of conversations and lots of going back and forth. And, I'm Cuban, so my English is not the greatest. So it was really good to have a teacher looking behind me right after I wrote things. So it was great. I think what we came up with together was very good.
And it really was good. Pauli Murray's story, like you and Rosita, you made a great team. And the creation of Pauli Murray, the life of a pioneering feminist and civil rights activist, it was really a team effort. And like, it's always great to have somebody in your corner, like, or maybe when you're having trouble, just somebody right by your side, just giving you advice and helping you. So
right.
I think that Pauli Murray's story, like, you can't, just one person can't write that story. You need more people. You need a team. And you had the perfect team. And I think that Pauli Murray's story is perfect. Like everything about it, from the writing style to the information that you added, I think it's just a perfect story. Your answers are just so inspiring. And I just feel so honored to chat with you. And I'm just excited to learn more. And that leads me to my next question. What's the most important message you'd like readers to take away from Pauli Murray, the life of a pioneering feminist and civil rights activist?
Okay. I really thought about this one, Eve. And I'm going to get technical here, but this is so, so important. Pauli Murray believed in the 14th Amendment. Mm-hmm. The 14th Amendment says that everyone has the right to equal protection of the laws. Everyone must be equal before the law. So let's say, for instance, that the polls stay open only until 5 o'clock, so that people who have to work late, like people of color, like Cuban people like me, and like, people who have to work 2 jobs, they will not be able to get to the polls if the polls close early, and if there's no absentee voting or if there's no mail-in voting. So that means that those people are not getting treated equally before the law. They're not being protected equally by the law. So there's a lot going on right now that is forgetting the 14th Amendment or overriding the 14th Amendment, right? we're, this is Pride Month. Everyone must have protection before the law, because civil unions must be recognized as legally binding, so that someone can speak for their partner when they're ill, or someone can make a decision on a contract, or it is very important that we not forget the power and the rights that we are given under the 14th Amendment. And so that means that regardless of how hard it is to vote, and when you get to vote, we must all vote to get people in the chairs that make the laws, into the Senate, into the House, into the local legislature, the state legislatures, people who understand the importance of the 14th Amendment, people who understand the importance of equal protection under the law. And that's Pauli Murray's message.
So yeah, the message of equality, social justice, that's really relayed in Pauli Murray, the life of a pioneering feminist and civil rights activist. And I'm just so thankful I've had the opportunity to read about the inspiring life of Pauli Murray. And I truly hope that her story gets shared in all the history books. And what are some ways that students and kids like me, or people of all ages, can share Pauli Murray's story? And what do you want to see happen in the future?
I would love to see Pauli Murray in schools. I would love to see Pauli Murray read by all young children, all young readers. This book, I think, is accessible, is good. I think adults can read this book, I really do. So I think that middle school students and high school students can read this book. And I think that 4th, 5th, 6th graders can read this book. So I hope that many of them do, and that word gets passed around about Pauli Murray, and that they learn about her through the book and through other ways. I am on my end, I'm trying to go to festivals and library association meetings, and I'm going to be at the ALA, American Library Association meeting with Pauli, bringing Pauli. Rosita and I will be there, and bringing Pauli to librarians. I'm in Virginia, so I'm going to the Virginia Association of School Librarians and bringing Pauli. So I'm trying to, I hope to do author visits, but so I'm trying to bring Pauli into the light, and doing my best, and you, by doing this podcast, are helping me with that.
If you could be or meet any literary character, fictional or real, who would you want to meet and why?
Oh, I would want to meet Lyra Silverton from The Golden Compass. I just think she is an amazing character. Philip Pullman was another one of the authors that I went to school on, because he writes such wonderful series. And when I was writing my series, I reread his over and over again. And I think I was using that as an excuse, because I love his writing so much. I think I probably read more than I needed to, but she just, and she has grown through the series. She's just a very, she's flawed. She's, she's good. She's got a good heart, but she always gets in trouble, and she is flawed, but then she still manages to do the right thing. So yeah, Lyra Silvertongue would be my all-time favorite. Second would be, and I don't think I can tell you the name of the girl, but who was, Winn-Dixie, because of Winn-Dixie is one of my favorite books. And that's one of those books that tugs at your heart, and you would think that I would remember the girl's name, but I'm old and I forget everything. So I've forgotten her. And who else? Hugo, the invention of Hugo Cabret. Oh, I love him too. So there's so many. I mean, I could go on and on and on. Now, when I was a kid, I read a lot of Jules Verne, and I read a lot, and I would have loved to, back then, I would have loved to have talked to him. because his adventures are so magnificent, such epic things. So I love them.
Well, I know there's never like too much reading of a good book. You just
Right.
have to remember that. You always have to remember like there's no such thing as too much reading. Like I could read for 24 hours straight. There's no such thing. So never put that thought into your head.
All right.
And Jules Verne and all the authors and characters that you've mentioned, I've heard a lot about them. And I just, well, I obviously, because I read so much, I also have a lot of characters that I'd want to meet, both fictional and real. And I think Jules Verne would probably be one that I'd like to meet as well. Like, how do you come up with such thrilling tales, epic tales like 30,000 Leagues Under the Sea? Like, his stories were ahead of his time. And I think that's just
Absolutely.
like, can you see the future, Jules Verne? Like,
right. Yeah, I think he did. He did.
Yeah.
That was just a very amazing thing. And in one respect, you might want to call it science fiction, but it wasn't.
Yeah.
When he wrote about submarines, I think there were submarines because there were submarines during the Civil War. So yeah, and it was he was way ahead of his time, and his adventures were gripping. And I'd read them over and over and over again.
And I haven't read 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea or any of his books yet. I need to read them. Like my parents have told me about them, and a lot of my favorite books are inspired by his tales. So I wrote like also like books like Daughter of the Deep, like Rick Riordan. He's so big, but he's inspired by Jules Verne.
Man. Yeah.
And
he's good.
Yeah, Jules Verne, Rick Riordan, like all of my, like so many great authors, they're ahead of their time, and their stories, they're just tales that I want to read over and over and over again. And I don't care what anybody tells me. And you need to remember, everybody needs to remember, there's no such thing as too much reading.
Absolutely.
And it's just been such a pleasure speaking with you today, Terry.
It has been wonderful. Thank you so much. And I wish you the best, and I'm happy to talk to you anytime. I wish you the best. You're doing great work.
Thank you. And I'd love to talk with you anytime. And I'm going to keep following your social media and all the work that you do as a writer. I'm just so grateful to have had the opportunity to read about the life of Pauli Murray. And I'm just so proud to share what I've learned with others in the hopes that Pauli Murray will one day get the recognition she so greatly deserves. And to all of you listening, I highly recommend reading Pauli Murray, the life of a pioneering feminist and civil rights activist, to learn more about all of her incredible contributions to this world. And feel free to listen to my book review of the Pauli Murray story. And even better, order your own copy of Terry's book on my website at etraintalks.com. All proceeds go to promoting literacy and also sharing Pauli Murray's story, because it deserves to be shared, as I've said many times. And once again, I've just talked with Terry C. Jennings, the author of Pauli Murray, the life of a pioneering feminist and civil rights activist. You can follow Terry C. Jennings' writing journey on social media and her website. You can read all about her story, all about her, and just about Terry C. Jennings on her website. And check out the link in the description of the podcast and YouTube channel for more info on Terry C. Jennings and her writing journey. Thanks for listening, everybody. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.